He stood alone near the edge of the training grounds, just an old man in a faded flannel shirt, worn boots, and a cap so sun-bleached you couldn't read the stitching. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched, and no one cared. Until one recruit looked closer. Then everything stopped. You're watching Stories Unseen. Thank you for being here. Stick around. Some truths don't shout, but they echo. Most figured he was nobody. A retired janitor. A local who wandered too close. Maybe a neighbor who liked. To watch pain dressed up as discipline. The kind of guy who showed up for free coffee and nostalgia. Nobody asked. Nobody really looked. Except Cole. It was Thursday when he first noticed something odd. Not about the man's silence, but about the way he stood. The stillness wasn't casual. It was trained, deliberate, intentional. And then there was the ink. Not flashy. Not decorative. Just a glimpse of something under the old man's sleeve. Faded but sharp. The kind of mark you didn't pick from a tattoo parlor wall. The kind that wasn't given. It was earned. Cole stopped in the middle of a crawl, dirt, stuck to his elbows, lungs on fire, and stared, not at the ink, but at the man wearing it. And in that moment, something in his gut moved faster than his brain. That man wasn't lost. He wasn't a bystander. He wasn't even out of place. He belonged. Long before any of them had even laced up their first boots, he had already walked the wire. And for the first time, Cole realized, maybe the loudest presence on that field didn't need to shout at all. He came every Thursday, always alone, always early, before the instructors arrived, before the cadence calls echoed across the gravel. Before anyone had a chance to question why he was there, the old truck would rumble into the dirt lot beyond the perimeter. And out would step the same man, slow but steady, limping slightly like a leg that once broke and never healed quite right. He never crossed the line, never waved, just stood there, arms folded, watching. From a distance, he looked like a relic. But anyone paying close enough attention could see it wasn't curiosity in his eyes. It was memory. He watched the way recruits dropped their rifles during low crawls, the way their feet staggered in formation, and each time, a small flicker crossed his face. Not judgment, not irritation, but something deeper. Like his muscles still remembered what theirs were trying to learn. The younger recruits didn't notice. The older ones sometimes joked that he came back for ghosts or guilt. But the instructors, they didn't laugh. And none of them told him to leave. Because in places like this, respect isn't spoken. It's recognized. And whatever that man had done, wherever he had done it, he had earned the right to stand there without question. He wore nothing that gave him away, no medals, no insignias, just the same sun-faded cap and flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up to the elbow. But sometimes, when the breeze kicked up or he stretched slightly, a bit of ink peeked out from under his left sleeve. Most thought it was just sun-worn skin, maybe a faded scar. But one day, Cole looked closer. He saw shape in the blur, sharp lines, aged but deliberate, a symbol, not decorative, not stylized, the kind of mark you didn't get because you wanted it, but because you'd earned it, probably the hard way. That day, the heat hung low over the training grounds, heavy like a second skin. Bullhorns echoed across the compound. Boots slammed into the dirt, metal dragged, bodies hit gravel. The drills pushed them to the edge, arms trembling, vision blurred. At that point, movement wasn't thought. It was instinct. It was grit. But Cole wasn't just watching the drills. He was watching him. The old man stood exactly where he always did, just outside the fence line, leaning against a rusted post like it had been waiting there just for him. Arms folded, still. No clipboard, no badge, no uniform. Just that same unreadable expression. To most, he looked like a ghost, a harmless shadow from another life. Maybe a janitor. Maybe nobody. But Cole had started to notice things. The way the man's eyes moved, tracking specific recruits, not randomly, but with intent. The way his head tilted slightly when someone's form slipped, as if he could see the mistake before it even happened. The way his stance didn't waver, like his body had been trained to endure more pressure than anyone on that field could imagine. And then came the wind. A dry gust rolled across the field, lifting shirts, dust, and for a moment, the edge of the old man's sleeve, just high enough. Cole saw it clearly this time. Faded ink, quiet, subtle, but precise. It wasn't flashy, oversized, or meant to be noticed. It wasn't the kind of thing you bought or boasted about. It was earned, probably at a cost no one could explain out loud. He didn't react, not right away. But something shifted inside him, in his spine, in his chest. It wasn't awe, it was recognition. His body had processed something his mind hadn't caught up to yet. That wasn't just a bystander. That wasn't just some forgotten veteran with stories to tell. That was someone who had walked the line before any of them knew which way to lace their boots. That wasn't just some forgotten vet with stories to tell. That was someone who had walked the line before most of them had even been born. And Myers couldn't shake it. Later that day, after the drills ended and the instructors dispersed, he found himself walking behind the training center, not sure where he was going until he saw the truck. It was still there, parked just outside the fence. The old man stood beside it, pouring the last of his coffee from a dented thermos, eyes on the empty course. Myers didn't speak. He didn't get too close. He just stood there, maybe 15 feet away, uncertain why his legs had carried him there in the first place. The old man didn't look over. He didn't have to. His presence said more than words ever could. It didn't demand attention. It earned it. Eventually, the man shifted his weight, not like someone tired, but like someone trained to move efficiently. He glanced at Myers, brief, measuring, then climbed into the truck, shut the door softly and pulled away, gravel crunching beneath his tires in a slow rhythm that felt heavier than the drills they'd run that morning. Myers stood there long. After he was gone, the last bit of sun catching the top of the flagpole across the yard. He didn't know who the man was, or what he'd done, but something told him that man had earned the silence the rest of them took for granted. That night, Myers couldn't sleep. His body ached, his mind spun. But it wasn't the soreness keeping him up. It was the tattoo, the glance, the presence. He'd seen videos online, guys faking valor, bluffing their way through stolen history. But nothing about this man felt scripted. In fact, what made him unforgettable was how little he said, how completely he avoided attention, and yet how impossible he was to ignore. Around 2 a.m., Myers climbed out of his bunk, careful not to wake anyone, and headed for the corner console in the rec room. His eyes stung, his hands still dusty from the day's drills. He opened the laptop and stared at the blank search bar. He typed, "Old Recon Vet Tattoo. Silent Observer. Base Visitor Access." Nothing. He tried again. Narrower. Visitor Logs. Old Personnel. Archives. Most were redacted or locked behind layers of clearance. But then, one line caught his eye. Harrow. T status. Retired. Access. Authorized Observer. Non-instructional. He clicked through. No photo. No contact info. No service record. Just one note, cleared for silent observation. No engagement. Myers blinked. That wasn't normal, not even close. Nobody got that kind of access unless they were someone. And this one, it had been renewed every year. No expiration, no official title. Just permission. Like the man had been written into the system as a shadow. He dug deeper. Late-night adrenaline driving him past firewalls and outdated folders. Then it popped up again, Harrow's name, buried in an old internal memo from a training overhaul dated 2 decades ago. It described him as a foundational consultant for early recon readiness protocols. No service number, No deployments, no rank confirmation. Just a name, a mention. A trace of someone who once existed officially, but only barely. Myers leaned back. He wasn't sure what unsettled him more, that he found so little, or that someone had worked very hard to keep it that way. He kept digging, deeper than he should have. And there it was, one final mention, tucked away in an oral history archive, forgotten and unindexed. No transcript, no recording, just metadata. Recon Unit 2, Deep Territory Ops, year 1970. Debrief, denied. Outcome, classified. Field lead, Harrow. T. Myers leaned back in his chair. Operations that never made it to records. The kind of missions where men disappeared, came back quiet, or didn't come back at all. Things people didn't talk about, because they weren't allowed to, or because they just couldn't. He closed the laptop slowly. No victory. No answers. Just a growing weight in his chest. Whoever this man was, he hadn't come back to relive anything. He came to watch, and maybe, just maybe, to see if anyone was ready to carry what he once did. The next Thursday, everything looked the same. But it didn't feel the same. Same truck, same dented thermos, same quiet walk toward the fence. But from the moment he arrived, the air changed. The instructors were sharper, their voices lower, the drills more precise, like the whole compound had dropped half a decibel out of instinct. Not fear, awareness. He stood at the edge of the field, like always, arms crossed. Cap pulled low, silent. But this time, people noticed. It began with one instructor, an older guy with ribbons buried deep in his file, who slowed during rotation. He turned, glanced at the fence, and froze. Not because he didn't recognize the man, but because he did. He said nothing, just stared, then kept walking, but softer. Later that afternoon, during rope drills, 2 more instructors paused. They didn't speak, just looked toward the fence, toward him. And something passed. Between them, unspoken but old, like a signal from a war no one teaches. By evening, most of the recruits were done, dragging back gear, heads down, training over. But Myers stayed. He stood at the edge of the field, chest still heaving from the last sprint, dust thick on his skin. And across the dirt, the old man was still there, watching. No badge, no clipboard, just presence. Then something happened. An instructor, known for never breaking routine, walked over. No gestures, no salutes. He stopped about 10 feet from the man and stood at full attention. Then another joined, and another. One by one, without a word, they lined up along the edge. No order was given. No one told them to move. They just knew. Some eyes glistened, jaws clenched. It wasn't out of grief, it was memory. A recognition, not of his name, but of what he carried. Myers felt something rise in his chest. It wasn't awe, it wasn't pride. It was older than that. He swallowed it down, standing completely still, because in that moment, nobody cared about rank, or drills, or scores. They stood because they knew, because the silence that man carried weighed more than most of their medals ever would. And when he finally turned and walked toward his truck, nobody moved. He opened the door, calm as ever, 1 foot inside the cab. Then a voice called out, low, respectful, "Sir, would you consider speaking to the recruits next week?" The old man paused, looked back just slightly and said, "Nothing to say." Then he got in, closed the door, and drove away. He left without fanfare, no salute, no thanks. Just the quiet crunch of gravel and a fading trail of dust behind the truck. But long after he disappeared, the instructors stayed where they were, standing still. Not because they were told to, but because some men never have to explain who they are. You saw it in how others stood when he appeared. By the next day, the compound returned to routine. On the surface, at least. Drills resumed. Commands shouted. Recruits chased reps, miles, and bruises like nothing had changed. But something had. Nobody talked about what happened. They just carried it. For Myers, it stayed with him. In the locker room, in the way he watched the instructors more closely, in how he adjusted his form without being told. It wasn't just respect. It was responsibility. That tattoo. That silence. That weight. It had shifted something in him. One night, after lights out, he whispered the thought to two others who'd stood with him near the fence. "We should mark that spot," he said. "Lane 4, fence line." No one laughed. No one asked why. One just replied how. They didn't ask permission, didn't submit a request. A few nights later, under cover of darkness, they returned with a small brass plate. It was polished by hand, no bigger than a palm. Simple. Quiet. They bolted it to the inside of the fence, just above eye level. No name, no rank, no title. Just a few words, reserved until he says otherwise. It wasn't a tribute. It wasn't meant for attention. It was a placeholder, for presence, for memory, for everything that man carried without ever asking to be seen. The following Thursday, he returned. Just like always. Same boots, same jacket, same thermos in hand. He walked the usual path, then paused as his eyes met the plaque. He didn't touch it, didn't nod, didn't react. He simply looked. Then he turned back toward the field, leaned against the same post as always, and resumed watching. But this time, something had changed. Every recruit who passed that stretch of fence straightened their back, not because they knew who he was, but because they felt what he represented. And somehow, that was enough. It wasn't until weeks later that someone finally said his name. It didn't come from him. He never offered it, never wore it. But stories have a way of drifting when silence is respected. One of the older instructors recognized the ink, not from a book, not from a film, but from a face in a grainy photo buried in a folder few had ever seen. The name attached to it was Thomas Harrow. No public records, no medals on file, just whispers, and a handful of men still alive who remembered what he had done, and fewer still who dared speak of it. Still, every Thursday, he returned. Always alone, never missed, never asked for anything, and every time he stood there, more and more recruits noticed. They didn't ask questions. They didn't stare. They just stood a little straighter, not because someone told them to, but because presence teaches louder than orders. The plaque stayed. So did the silence. Time passed. Some instructors rotated out. New faces arrived. But the old man came every Thursday, just as he always had. Until one morning, he didn't. No announcement, no explanation, just an empty spot along the fence. They waited, one Thursday, then another. A month went by. The plaque remained untouched, though now more eyes paused when passing it. Some lingered. Most didn't say a word. But something had changed. The absence was louder than his presence ever was. One evening, after the compound had gone quiet, Myers, now in the final phase of training, walked back to Lane 4 alone. The field was still, the kind of stillness that holds memory in the air. He stood exactly where the man used to stand, arms folded, eyes forward. It wasn't the same, but it was something, a gesture of respect, a way to say thank you without saying anything at all. Then, just as he was about to leave, he noticed something, taped gently to the back of the plaque, an envelope, weathered, creased at the edges. His name on the front, in pen. Just Myers. No rank, no title. Inside was a coin, heavy, old, worn at the edges. On one side, a symbol, quiet, deliberate, etched deep into the metal. On the other, no words, just a single line, engraved by hand. Still watching. He never found out who left it. No one claimed to know. But he didn't need confirmation, because some men don't disappear. They don't retire. They don't ask to be remembered. They simply fade into the lives they've shaped, leaving no medals, no monuments, just discipline, just silence, and the kind of example that doesn't fade when they're gone. Some warriors leave behind awards. Some leave behind stories. But the rarest ones, the ones you almost miss, leave behind presence. They don't speak. They don't correct the record. They just watch, from a distance, to see if anyone was paying attention. Thomas Harrow never told his story. He never asked for anything. But the silence he left behind taught a generation how to listen. Myers stood by the fence one last time. Arms folded, back straight, eyes steady. And for the first time, he wasn't watching to learn. He was watching to remember. Let me leave you with this. Have you ever crossed paths with someone like that? Someone who didn't need to speak loud to leave a lasting mark, who left behind more than words ever could. If you have, say their name below. Let their silence be heard. And if this story stirred something in you, we'd be honored to have you with us. Subscribe to Stories Unseen. We're growing, one quiet story at a time. And your support helps keep them alive. Thanks for staying. Thanks for remembering.